This is TWIS. This Week in Science, episode number 765, recorded on Wednesday, March 18th, 2020. Who has the Mars maps? I'm Dr. Kiki, and today we will fill your head with virus, crocs, and flies. But first, thanks to the Burroughs Welcome Fund and our Patreon sponsors for their generous support of TWIS. You can become a part of the Patreon community at patreon.com/thisweekinscience.
Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. If you went outside today and you're not essential staff, why? Maybe you haven't heard. We're in the midst of a global pandemic. A virus has gone viral despite not getting any likes. So we all need to come together to fight it by staying as far apart as possible. And while the world is reeling from the reality that nature still exists, that we are still very much connected to nature, and that even the smallest form of life, a life form that doesn't even check all the boxes for the normal definition of life, can bring about consequences that shut down civilizations the world round. One thing that can't be shut down, that's right, it's This Week in Science, coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind that can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening. What's happening? What's happening this week in science? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening this week in science?
Good science to you, Kiki.
And a good science to you too, Blair. And everyone out there, welcome to another episode of This Week in Science. We are back again with more science to fill your mind. That's right, to suit all the curious thoughts that you've had. That's what we're here for. And that's why we love coming back every single week. This week, Justin has been trying to join us, but his internet is not cooperating. He's out on a farm in a bus. So I don't know. Maybe he'll join us at some point during the show if things come together, all of the electrons align. But until that time, we are going to have a great show no matter what. I have stories about COVID-19 so that we can talk about some of the big news that's gone on, the science for the last week, and also some transplanted limbs. Blair, what is in the animal corner?
Oh my goodness. I have erasing memories. I have crocodiles. And for the very end of the show, I actually have some positive news about the coronavirus. We have time.
Fantastic. We like positive news here. Let's have a little bit of positivity and optimism mixed in. We also have a melting T-Rex with us this evening. We are going to start our show with an interview with Dr. Fred Califf III, and he will be talking with us about mapping Mars, which is very exciting. Whether or not he remains in T-Rex form certainly does depend on the strength of the batteries in that costume.
Yeah, it's all about the electron.
It's all about the electrons. Okay, as we jump in, I would like to remind you that subscribing to the TWIS podcast on your favorite podcast platform, YouTube or Facebook, is going to bring you TWIS each and every week. That's right. Every time a new episode is published, it will come to you because you're subscribed. So search for This Week in Science or visit twis.org. But now it's time for the science. Okay, Fred Califf has a PhD in Mars geology. And according to his Twitter bio, he works with InSight, the Mars Science Lab on Curiosity, and the Mars 2020 mission at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, mapping landing sites in return for food. Is this what the way that they pay you at NASA? With food?
Rawr! Yeah. Okay. The joke was fun. Yeah. You know the amazing thing about dinosaur costumes they don't tell you is that they have humans inside. They're also very hot.
They're very warm, aren't they?
Then they would do
Suddenly
that
a human. It's like It's like a
Hello.
butterfly emerging from a chrysalis.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, the scariest butterfly I've ever seen. Anyways,
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Anyways, yeah. So I'm a geologist by training, but I was always into mapping. It's kind of the skill I have to do my geology, looking at pressure impact craters on Mars. And yeah, so I came to JPL about 8 years ago and worked on landing site analysis for the Curiosity rover. And from there, got hired onto the mission to do mapping to help track the rover, as well as every place that we do science. Whenever time we find a rock on the ground, I do my best to always have a rock in hand. I'm a geologist, right?
Right.
To let's see. Oh yeah, there's
Is that a regular rock or is that a Mars rock?
I wish it was a Mars rock. No, it is a regular rock. It's a piece of granite from my hometown. So I grew up on a piece of granite Pluton. Actually, that's really true. Anyways, long story short. Yeah, so I'm there and I work on the various rover missions. I've also worked a little bit on InSight, and basically anything going to Mars, I'm more or less involved on the surface things.
Nice. And on your bio for NASA, it says that you are the keeper of the maps.
Yes.
What does that mean? What does that entail?
I take all the maps from the team and I stick them in a box and I say mine. No, I basically it's keeping track of helping keep track where the rover is every day. So every time the rover moves, we need to find out where it went. It kind of keeps track of itself, but if we don't tell it where it actually is, it forgets. So like some days it's like, I'm here. And we go, no, you're over here. Because if we didn't do that, eventually that over here would be like a kilometer away. So I help make sure that base map is assembled and was put together. And then we track the rover every day as we move along. And then I also keep track of all the rocks that we do science on. So when we take a picture of a rock or shoot it with like chem, the laser to get the chemistry, or put the arm down to take a picture of it or drill. We want to know where that is so that over time we can build up the science story of, here's where we landed, here were the rocks were like, okay, then we went to Yellowknife Bay, where the rocks like there. Now we're at Mount Sharp. How have those rocks changed over time? So I just kind of do the geometry to figure out where all those things are for various instruments.
So here on Earth, we have satellites that allow us to use GPS. And even with GPS, when I call, a Uber or Lyft or one of these car services, sometimes they want to pick me up halfway down the block.
Right.
They
or
think I am some...
You're on a bridge, but it looks like you're actually in the ocean.
Right. Yep.
So how do you, the fact that we have GPS here and it's inaccurate at times, how do you manage that on another planet where we don't have satellites?
Well, we do have satellites. We have.
Do we?
Well, we do. Yeah, we have 5 satellites. Mars Odyssey, which is about 20 years old. Mars Cronus Orbiter is about 10 to 15. Maven, Mars Express, ISRO from India, and I'm probably missing one, but I don't think I am. So about 5 satellites in orbit, but they don't have GPS. You could kind of make a GPS out of it, but it wouldn't be super accurate. So our GPS system has 25-ish satellites that are constantly orbiting in different orbits. And at any one time to get your location, you need you need a minimum of 3. You really want 8 at one time. And so they have all these different constellations. There's always like 8 satellites overhead. On Mars, you're lucky to get 1, maybe 2 at the same time. And so you just can't get that same positional accuracy. So we don't do GPS. Literally, myself and one other person, Dr. Tim Parker, we're localization scientists. And so we keep track of whether we are the Martian GPS for the rovers. So basically we have a very high detailed base map of where the rover is. And it's the pixel size are about 25 centimeters per pixel. It's like the size of a laptop. And then we take images on the ground and we literally just match them up together manually and say, okay, this rock is that rock in the orbit, and that's crater is that crater. And so we use that to actually locate the rover on the surface. And we do that every time the rover drives. It's a very manual process. It's kind of an old, like pick this here, triangulate and get a location. However, we are usually within 25 centimeters, 50 centimeters at most of any time the rover drives. So, more accurate than GPS on Earth, but, a very manual process. Also, we don't drive that far.
And how, but you're saying that sometimes better where the rover is than the rover does. So that's how you're figuring it out. Then how is the rover figuring out where it is?
Okay. So the rover inside has an IMU, an inertial measurement unit. So basically when it moves, it can measure that motion. But it has a certain level of accuracy to that. So it can tell like when it's moving forward or to the side or turning and pivoting. And it can go a certain way and get an accuracy of, let's say, 5 centimeters. Like, let's say you can drive 10 meters, 5 centimeter accuracy. It drives 20 meters, it's, maybe 25 centimeters. It's 40 meters, it's a meter off. And then the farther we go, the more it gets off. So eventually when you're driven kilometers like we've driven almost 20 kilometers, you would be off by 5 kilometers if you didn't have anyone to like scooch it around to the right place. So, for short drives, it's not a big deal, but for longer drives, it really becomes an issue. Yeah.
So it's almost like an odometer kind of.
Well, yeah, it's a little bit of that. We actually do count, the spinning of the wheels, the revolutions of the tire, of the wheels. And that gives us one measure of distance. But we tie that with also the direction of where it moved. Mm-hmm. And then we also try to look at like, it'll drive, it'll take a bunch of pictures, and then it'll drive again. It'll take pictures again and try to see like, oh, I think that rock is that rock. That means we moved 10 centimeters. I thought we moved 15. Okay, I'll make a correction. But just eventually over time, it's just not as accurate as manually every once in a while doing the physical match. And it's actually, even from a computer vision standpoint, it's really difficult because we're, on the ground, you can see things that are like a centimeter, you can see a little pebble, you could see this little fossil if it existed, if only it existed.
On Mars.
On Mars. Oh my goodness. Like, we all win awards. Yay. But, when you try to compare that to something like, can you find this on this piece of paper, from orbit? No, you won't. You'll never see it. So, it's just tricky. And so the rover has the same problem of trying to keep itself together and knowing where it is.
Have you ever been in a situation like thinking about how the wheels could spin? Have you ever been in a situation where it's slippery rocks and the wheels kind of spin and so that odometer's going, but no movement is happening? And
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Not often, but occasionally we do cross some bigger sheets of sand or areas of sand. The one I can think of for a curiosity was Hidden Valley. It was a big valley, actually. Is it? It's somewhere on that map there, down towards the bottom. Oops. Yeah, that's okay. You have to go up. Let's see. Moonlight Valley, Hidden Valley. Sorry, I'm pointing at your screen, which you don't see. That's okay. Actually, I don't think it's not labeled there. In any case, it was like a street-sized width valley filled with sand, and we're like, oh, we'll just drive right over, it'll be fine. And then we got halfway through, and then row. Wheels were spinning. We're like, oh, we drove across, and we looked. We're like, oh no, we didn't. So it does happen, not often, because generally we try to drive on ground that's pretty firm and doesn't slip a lot. But every once in a while, stuff happens. But we've always backed out and been able to get around it. So we've been good that way. But yeah, sometimes on a rare occasion, we do think we've driven 20 meters, we've driven 20 centimeters, and then we have to like, okay, let's rethink what happened. But mostly you get the images back and you go, we're not where we thought we were going to be. Yeah. Based on this is way, way off, and we have to figure it all out again. Yes, exactly. And so after every time we drive, we always take images at the end because we need to know where we are. We may think we went 20 meters, and when actually we went, 2. Critically important. Makes changes the whole mission at that point. What we're going to do the next day.
Yeah. What kind of things are important? So you in part of your role, you're finding these landing locations. So the landing site for the Mars 2020 mission, InSight. What is important for a landing site, and how do you figure out where these spots are?
Well, 2 parts. First part of the science has to be interesting. We've really been doing the follow the water. It's been kind of NASA's mission. So we've looked for places that maybe have been former lakes, like Gale Crater, where Curiosity is. Same thing for Gusev Crater, where the Spirit rover, the Mir rover Spirit landed, or where Opportunity landed, which was they thought was like a sandy, shallow sea in Meridiana Planum. Jezero Crater, also there should seem to be like a crater filled with a lake, and then a river delta at the end emptying into the lake. So anywhere where there was water. Now we're really looking for a little bit more than just water, but actually evidence of past life, which is really hard to do. Even on Earth, it's hard to find a piece of rock and drill into it and take that out and find this ancient microbe from 2 billion years ago. And sometimes we get some results, and sometimes it's like, I don't know, it kind of looks like that thing.
And so they look at you as the keeper of the maps, and they say, just, throw a tack at it. Tell us where the life is. We're going to land there.
Yeah, pretty much. But, not just one place. There are a bunch of places on Mars, 50, 100 places that people put time and studies in and look at it from orbit and say, oh, well, I think the water flowed this way, and we see these minerals, and that means it was this type of environment. Oh, well, maybe microbes could grow there. So that's one part. But the other part is simply we have a limit of physical capability, the engineering part. So we have to land below a certain elevation in Mars, because Mars' atmosphere is incredibly thin. It's 6,000ths of Earth's. So, you have to go really deep close to the surface before you get enough air, essentially, on Mars to start to use things like parachutes. In fact, it's so thin. So Mars is kind of, it gives us always a bit of a problem, because it has enough air, that atmosphere, that you will burn up if you just try to fly straight in. However, it doesn't have enough atmosphere to use a parachute to slow you all the way down to you just glide down and then just pop at the bottom. So we use a combination of parachutes and rockets to slow ourselves down till we can land. So in that case, we have to land below a certain elevation on Mars. So that limits parts of Mars. Other parts of Mars are super dusty. We can't land in really dusty areas, either A, because we will get too much dust on solar panels, or it's simply everything's going to be covered with dust and we won't see anything, and we might even be able to drive through it. It'll be like they call it the foo-foo dust. It's so porous that you just be like, like in a foam pit. You jump in a foam pit and you're like, oh, I can't get out. It would be something like that. Some version of that.
The technical name, foo-foo dust.
The technical name is foo-foo dust. Yeah. We have lots of technical names like that, and lots of acronyms. So those close off essentially whole areas of Mars to landing. So we try, so we kind of exclude those out and pick the science areas that are outside those areas, and then we design towards where those science targets are. And we also try to keep close to the equator, so it's warmer. The farther north or south you go, the colder it gets, and then it's just uses a lot of energy, and then we can't do as much science. We have to sit there all day to do one science observation if you were way up north. So anyways, those are the kind of things we use to help pick a landing site on Mars.
Right.
A little bit of science, a little bit of engineering.
The combination of the two.
Yep.
How do you know, looking at pictures from the surface, what the actual, as a geologist, how do you go about figuring out the characteristics of the surface just based on pictures?
Sure.
Whether it's foo-foo dust or
right
or not.
Yeah. Different instruments, different data. So sometimes we just take pictures just like we do on Earth, from orbit, and we can tell the landforms, and we compare those landforms directly to landforms we see on Earth. So Earth analogs kind of tell us things about what is happening on Mars. we see things that look like lake beds. We see things that look like river streams that are meandering. We see volcanoes, we see glaciers, or evidence of glaciers. So we do that directly Earth comparison. The other part is that we can look in visible light to look at shape and form and morphology. We can also look at chemistry. So if we see rocks, if we see carbonates, that tells us something about how those rocks were formed. If we can also look in the kind of the heat version of the visible spectrum. So we can look at the heat signature. So if we see rocks are really bright during the day, but then they're cold at night, well, that's probably sand. So that tells us something about the material properties. If it's the opposite, it's cold during the day, but warm at night, that means it's probably a solid rock. And so we can use that to kind of tease out how the rocks were made and how they're put down and how they form. So we kind of have to piece all these things together. And sometimes we do a lot of math. We do say like, well, what if you had a volcano that had a lot of silica for the lava and you combined it with a lot of nickel and not a lot of nickel, but something else. And then you put them together, what would be the result and what would the landform look like? And so we can do those comparisons as well. It's really tricky. It's a lot of detective work. Yeah. More so. And sometimes there are things on Mars that are simply different and we don't know. And it takes a lot of poking at problems. And, I think there's quite a few people who will admit that, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, this is what my PhD was on. By the way, it was completely wrong. But that's okay. That is science, and especially planetary science, where we kind of go out on the limb a lot of times, and that's okay. We have to push it a lot of directions to finally narrow down to where we think it's actually happening.
That's fascinating. Yeah, what have been some of the most surprising findings that you've been a part of?
Oh boy. I think the most surprising one is in Gale Crater, where the Curiosity rover is. We expected there to be evidence of water, and some geology that had water, but the more we look, like we see everything, like water was everywhere in Gale Crater, which may be a surprise, but the more we look at Mars, the more we see that water was all over the planet. We think of Mars right now, it's cold, it's rusty, it's dry, there's no atmosphere, almost no atmosphere, very inhospitable. And we used to have these little pinpricks of ideas that there was water on the surface. And now it's basically like, it was just everywhere. And now, we don't argue where the water was. We worry about maybe, was it ice, or how long did it last? Did it last 2 billion years? Did water come out yesterday on the surface? Or was the last time we saw water was 2 billion years ago or 3 billion years ago? So we're kind of arguing some of that minutia, but, water was everywhere. And at Gale, that was certainly so. And then, the big discovery is we went to, we wanted to find evidence of a lake and see if it was habitable. And that's what we found. We drilled in Yellowknife Bay, the rocks, even when they drilled the rocks, they turned into a powder, and that powder was green now, or greenish or grayish. All the other rocks we had drilled or scraped on Mars were red. And so one of the geologic tests for any rock is to do a streak test, which is literally just taking a rock and rubbing it on a piece of porcelain. It just scrapes the rock and you get a powder, and that powder tells you about the rocks. So if the powder's red, generically for Mars, they're saying it's very oxidized, which means it's not a very habitable environment. Your rocks, basically the water that put those rocks down are like acids, they're going to eat up life. So these rocks were streaking kind of green, grayish, which that told us there was a reducing environment, which means there was less oxygen, which means it was more like water from a lake on Earth. And then we measured the mineral elements inside the rocks that we drilled, and they were filled with all these cool nutrients that early life would have loved. So you could have taken some Earth microbes at way back 3-4 billion years ago on Mars, found a lake, threw them in, they probably would have been happy. So it was exactly what we wanted to find, and it's what we did. And that, and we did it within 300 Earth days. So it was just you couldn't have asked for anything better. We did it almost immediately, Mars likes to eat spacecraft. We've been very successful with the U.S. missions as of 1990s on. But any day could be the last day of the mission. So to get a science return, to get the primary science return, is so important. And we really found it, and we our predictions were right, and that was pretty awesome. And now everything, and not everything is gravy. I mean, we hadn't gotten to the mountain yet. Mount
Right.
Sharp. It's 5 kilometers tall. It's a big stack of rocks that we think tells the history of Mars. And we're literally driving from the bottom to the top. And in geology, that's the oldest rocks, basically up to the youngest rocks. And that's what's really exciting about Gale Crater, why we went there. Because we maybe look at Mars history in this one section. So every day we can go higher up Mount Sharp, see new rocks. We're just learning something more about the whole planet. So super exciting. How
far up have you gone so far?
We are about, for the whole height of the mountain, we're maybe 20-ish%.
Okay.
Something like that, 30%. We're about 200 meters above the landing site. So we're kind of still at the bottom, but we're getting there. We're making our way up. And from orbit, our whole point was to go to the mountain. But we couldn't land on the mountain. It was just too rough. So we landed 10 kilometers away. And so we've been spending all these years just trying to get to that point. Even though we found really cool stuff at where we landed, which was the best. But we really wanted to go to the mountain. So we're taking we're trying to work our way up, and so it's pretty exciting. So we're like 20% of the way. We will only get up about, I'm going to throw out a number, 40% of the way, simply because the top is too rough. However, the top of the mountain is mostly all the same material as far as we can tell. So we're excited if we can get to that point where we go from what we think is wet Mars at the bottom of the mountain to the interface where we get to dry Mars. I mean, done. Did it. Perfect, yeah. But
how much longer? I mean, you've been there several years and are 20%. I mean, do you think there's any possibility? I mean, the engineering of Curiosity is amazing.
Yeah. Well, well, we have to trade science today, science tomorrow. Which one do you want? Right. So you can stay here and do all this great science, but it's in this small area. Or you can do a little science and then do a little science and a little science and do a little science up here and get this bigger picture. So we have to balance that. Engineering wise, the rover is doing awesome. Had some issues. We had some issues with the drill. We had some issues with the wheels. We solve those problems. That's what JPL does. So we've still got all the instruments basically working at 100%. Some are a little degraded, but not so much that we're not going to get some amazing science. So, I think we can do it. We just have to, keep our, mast in the right direction, something like that. The camera's pointed in the right direction, something like that. But that's a goal. Everyone wants to go higher. It's just a matter of, science today, science tomorrow.
Yeah. That's you have to really figure out what you want and what's more important to your goals. And
absolutely. Yeah.
Really figuring that out. For as far as what's going on right now, we've got InSight that has also had some issues. It landed great, ended up pretty much right where you wanted to be. Is it still doing well? What's your role with InSight since it's landed?
My role was very early in the mission. Since I was keeper of the maps, I was the keeper of the map because the lander doesn't move. The idea was that we wanted to know in front of the lander, where can we put down the seismometer size and the heat probe HP3 in this area, just in front of the rover, like the size of your desk. Where can we put those instruments where they will get the most science and where they can operate for forever until they decide to stop working. So I helped map out that landing area and then developed a web-based tool to help scientists look at the different areas and engineers and decide where those instruments went. So once that was done, so they found a good place to put the seismometer, a nice quiet place, and where to put the heat probe. And then, my job was done and I walked away, per se. So they're doing really well. The seismometer size is doing great. We're seeing all sorts of weird earthquakes Mars quakes. Coming from Mars. There's a bunch of papers that just came out in Science and talk about how, we have these mysterious rumblings we don't understand. We have other things which we think are active, active Earth, Mars quakes. I can't stop myself. Mars quakes happening. There's also things where what we're really looking for is some big event that will happen somewhere near us. So it'll send a seismic wave all the way down to the core and come back so we can see what the interior is like. Haven't had one yet, but we're waiting for that. But yeah, it's returning all sorts of great information about the formation of the crust, how thick it is, and just how active Mars is right now. We can only make an assumption, like we didn't know, we always think about on Earth, like earthquakes, like, oh, there's horrible things, but they also tell us about what's moving and what's not on the surface. It's that, for Earth, obviously, for humans, it helps us decide, where can we live and where can we be safe. But on Mars, it's about like, how thick is the crust? How big is the core? Does it even have a core? That was the thing that blew my mind on that. Earth has a metallic core. Mars, we don't know. It could have a completely molten core, nothing solid. It's just a big ball of hot goo. It's weird, right? I would never have thought that was or there's a core, but it's solid and it's not moving and it's frozen all the way out to the surface, frozen in a rough sense, We don't know. I mean, that's why the seismometer is there. HB3, had a bit of a rough time. We've only drilled about that far down into the subsurface with a literal drill with Curiosity. So we have ideas of what the subsurface is like, but we don't really know. So we're like, oh, this area looks like it has 2 or 3 meters that we can get down to the surface, put the heat probe, we can pound down and life will be good. And then it went down about that much and it stopped. So Mars is tricky. But right now, so we literally have, let's see, props. If this is the heat probe, we've actually put the tip of the arm with its scoop on the end. And so we're kind of pushing it down and letting it hammer. And as it hammers down, we kind of push a little bit more to get it as deep into the soil as we can. Because we really want to measure the heat coming from the center of the planet. And because that tells us about how active it is. But we can't do that until we're down pretty far. Pretty far now. It's not that far. It's only about 1 meter or 2 and we can start to feel heat from the planet. But we're not going to get that deep, we don't think, but we're going to keep trying. So it may just take us a little bit longer, but we'll see,
Yeah. It's so fascinating.
First time we ever tried.
Yeah. Digging on Mars, the surface where you landed, there's a hard patch. And the question now, I would imagine, is it like that everywhere? Is it just this area? Is it dappled? Right. Yeah. And just, we're in an area that's, was originally a very old lava field. And so we see on the surface, there are lots of rocks everywhere. So it doesn't, but in the area, we're kind of in this little depression, that we think has a lot of soil, but it could be soil mixed with a lot of big rocks. And so if there's just a big rock below the surface, you'll never see it. The surface will look smooth as glass. And then you go, dink. And that's what we're kind of worried about, but we don't know yet. There's lots of things with the probe and how it hammers and, and how it touches the soil. And does it touch the soil enough to actually push down versus push up when the little hammer, because the hammer goes down and then back up. So it has a little recoil. And so if it's not touching the soil, it actually will bounce out. And it did that a few times because we were like, oh, it's going down awesome. And then it went ding, 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 ding. Like, no. Came all the way back up.
Ding, try it again. Ding, 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 ding. And so, we're just like, why are you doing that? That's ridiculous. But just physics, we've never done it before. So, just keep trying new things.
Yeah. That's got to be the most fun is the unknown nature and the exploration and the on the spot troubleshooting as well because of all the unknowns.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm more of a scientist than engineer, at least in terms of my day to day. But but the engineers, yeah, I mean, they love this stuff. They love to figure things out, and they do it really, really, really well. So yeah, I mean, but it's also, frustrating. Of course, you imagine there's some science to be like, heat probe, just go down. I want to get my science. But we do the best we can. Yeah, there's that animation there where we're putting the scoop on the tip of the probe just to give it a little bit of pressure to sink down. Yeah, and so that's Perseverance, our soon-to-be launching rover in July.
That's right. It was named Perseverance. That's the
Yes.
name of the Mars 2020 mission.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so we're all pretty excited.
Yeah. Are you excited about the landing location? Can you tell us about the landing spot for Perseverance?
Sure. So Perseverance is going to Jezero Crater, which is slightly north of the equator. And it is a 45-ish kilometer diameter crater. It used to have an ancient lake, so we can see a stream that went into the crater and then went out the other side. And at the entrance point, there's a huge river delta, which we're very excited about. So what we're hoping is that either the lake had some kind of organisms, or organism floated down the stream and were deposited in the lake. So it has a lot of clays in it, a lot of carbonates, which we don't see in a lot of places on Mars. So we're hoping that wherever that's there is organic related, or at least may preserve the organics. So those are things we're kind of looking for. So we're going to land in this another ancient lake, look at this ancient riverbed, see if any ancient organisms were preserved inside that river delta, or maybe within the carbonates themselves. That's our goal. And so then we're also going to, once we go there, and then just a general background is like this area is kind of used to be very volcanic. So there's a lot of heat, and when you have heat and you have a lot of water, so the water was liquid. And so those combinations of heat, warmth to kind of keep you moving or doing something. And then the water really is a great combination of terms of microbial life. Right. It could be, you could have water, but it may be frozen, too cold, and then you just can't do stuff, right? You go up to the Arctic, and what do you want to do? You want to sit in your cabin all day. Microbes,
put on a big puffy coat,
right?
Drink hot chocolate.
Fire. Yeah. No hot chocolate on Mars. It's very sad. So, but the heat is a good thing. So we're really excited that it's a place where we have kind of these two elements. So the rover's going to go there and collect samples at all these places we think we have organic life. Or in the cases of some of the instruments like Sherlock and Pixel, they can actually, or even SuperCam, they can actually look at a rock and see if there's organics in the rock, which is a totally new capability in terms of like visually seeing them. And then we'll take certain samples, we'll put them in little tubes. We'll drop them in a certain place on a surface, and then a whole other mission called Mars Sample Return will come collect them, put them in a rocket, put them to orbit, and another spacecraft's going to swing by, grab them, send it back to Earth, and then drop it home.
I didn't. What? I did not think we were ready to get samples back.
Oh, we're so ready. We Perseverance will literally drill samples. We'll collect a piece of rock about like this, stick it in a tube, seal it, and it's going to leave it somewhere on the ground. Then let's say your mission has to land there. It's probably going to be another. Well, the plan is to have another we call a fetch rover. It will literally just drive from the spacecraft, go get the samples, bring them back, and then stick them in a rocket. That rocket it is a gopher. That rocket takes off again, goes into orbit. Another spacecraft has to swing from Earth, grab that, come back home, and another spacecraft is going to detach and then land somewhere, and we collect the samples. Super complicated, but no, we are all in.
Very complicated, but
the most complicated part of this rover is that whole sample handling system, because it literally it drills a core, it sticks it inside the rover, does all these things. There's actually there is a little mini arm inside the rover and all in the belly. And all it does is it grabs a sample and turns it around and takes a picture and seals it. And then when it's ready, it'll take it and then drop it on the surface. It's super complicated, and everything has to be super clean. And, it's in the side of the rover. We can't go, put a wrench on it later. It has to work all the time, 100%. So yeah, and that's just getting the rock. And then we have to make sure we
just sounds like the rover is like eating it, digesting it, and like pooping out the sample ready to go. It sounds like.
That's pretty much it. Yeah. Yeah. That analogy has not gone unnoticed or unmentioned in our daily exercise.
That's
yes.
just me. Yeah. Okay, good.
I didn't want to break it out, but yes, we're going to poop out rock samples.
Leave it to our zoologist.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Fascinating.
It is
it's robot poop.
And the great part is we want to go collect it and bring it home. Yeah. I don't know. That's what we biologists so happy. Look at all the poop I collected. It's awesome.
And hopefully there won't be any microbes inside of the robot that then gets in the sample.
Well, that's exactly it. That's right. So we do all these very intense cleaning exercises, and we have a certain minimum amount of microbe or organic, not really microbes, but really organic material of any type that we're allowed in the system. So it's going to be super scrubbed and then some. So yes,
that'll That'll be amazing. Are you responsible, or are you part of the team that's responsible for marking where each of these little poops ends up? As they're dropped.
When you put it like that way, actually, yes, I will mark all the rover poops. I will. In fact, they will be probably some of the best documented locations on Mars. We have to. We need to know exactly where it is because the other rover has to come and find it. We will know down to the millimeter exactly where all those tubes are. Part of my job, my job on the mission is kind of like I do on MSL. I will be a mapping specialist, one of two.
Yeah.
Myself and Dr. Nathan Williams. We will help keep track of where the rover is, the areas where we want to do science, where all the science happened. And a lot of these, all the information, what pictures we took of the samples and where they are, we'll go into we call it a dossier, which will go back to scientists so that we can, when we get the samples back, here's what we learned from Mars, from the instruments. Now go throw your instruments at them and, do all the awesome science you can do that you do on Earth that you can't do on Mars. So, yeah.
That is so cool. That's just I think the way it all works together is just fascinating. All the details that need to be figured out. Mm-hmm. Right now, as we're in the middle of this COVID-19 crisis, the growing crisis, and more people are staying home. Now, these are robots that are on the surface of Mars.
Yep.
Who's watching the robots while everybody's at home?
Well, didn't plan it to be this way. But when the mission first lands, we kind of bring everyone together to kind of work out the very early days of the mission so we can kind of talk easily with each other. But after 90 days, we actually all go back to our own universities. So in general, the Mars missions or any planetary missions really works from remote operations. So we do have a bunch of engineers who kind of work together at JPL. But, it's all on computers. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of meetings. But it's certainly the case that we have WebEx or Zoom, we dial into meetings all the time. We're actually used to working remotely. Sometimes even I'm going to admit a little thing. Sometimes at a meeting you don't really want to go to, it's going to be an hour meeting. They need me for 5 minutes. I'm just going to dial in from my office. So doing remote operations is actually pretty natural for a lot of the mission operations people. There are only a few details that we're trying to work out this week in terms of people who need a certain machine and can they log on to it? And is there enough internet connection to do this complicated task? But otherwise, we're kind of, we were kind of set up. It didn't take much, for me personally, to transition to working remotely. In fact, a lot of times I will, because I live, JPL is in Pasadena, California. I'm in Huntington Beach, California, which, if anyone knows, is a good 40 miles away and not fun in the middle of rush hour traffic.
No.
So sometimes, if the operations is really early, I will work from home or stop somewhere, get a coffee, do some work at,
wait for rush hour to finish.
Wait for rush hour to finish, and then go in. So remote operations is kind of built into our DNA in terms of how we run things. So in that sense, we're very lucky that we were kind of prepared for it. There still are.
And the robots are used to working remotely.
The robots are always used to working remotely. Yeah, like there's like whatever. It's just another day. Yeah, but we do. Yeah, so we're still takes a little bit of transition because there are people who sometimes need to be there. But like everything, social distancing. If you can, instead of having 40 people in the room, you can have 2. You've solved a lot of problems there. So yeah, we're making do. But that's just mission operations, which is like 20% or 30% of JPL. The rest is people, who have labs and things like that. And so, there's, trickiness that way. You can't put 10 people in a small room, doing the things that they do. So yeah, by the way, for mission operations, we were very easy to trans over. It didn't take more than a week. And we were like, okay,
we're good.
I think we got this figured out. Yeah, we're good. Yeah.
That's
so
nice.
Keep them going.
In terms of landing sites and places that we have plans to go and places that you're looking at, and obviously, Mars very well, maybe as well as the back of your own hand. But could you have, if you could choose a place that you would go to land on Mars, where would you go?
You mean like sending a human?
Or just in general?
Okay, anywhere?
Is there a spot that if you had the choice, you would?
Okay. Oh, I see. Oh, where would I send the next mission?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a tough one. Valles Marineris is probably it's pretty exciting. It's the largest valley in the solar system. It's as long as the United States is wide. Certainly much deeper than our Grand Canyon. So lots of history there. I like all of Mars. It's kind of hard. But I also, the other thing is like, if we were talking about humans, I would send them to Gale Crater. I think it's very exciting. Or, for a bunch of reasons. But I'm a little bit biased, cause I work on that mission a lot. And that was kind of my big mission to join. But I think going to some of the volcanoes, get some of the, we don't go to really, like almost every rock on Mars is, basaltic or volcanic to some way, shape or form, chemically wise. But actually visiting a volcano would be pretty exciting. A lava flow. Doing some measurements there. Going to the polar caps would be pretty exciting. Drilling in some ice, looking at the ice layers and seeing what's in what is in the ice column, especially deep into it, I think would be exciting as well. But yeah, or almost anywhere. It's hard to pick sometimes. Some more exciting than others, but it's like, it's all good. I would love us to go back to Gusev Crater, which was like, very interesting and like these weird digitate features, which maybe are like hot springs. Like, well, are they? I'm going to go there and crack one of those off and take a look at it up close. So stuff like that. Yeah.
So now I'm wondering.
Okay.
If you physically could go to Mars.
Yes.
Would you?
Yes.
In a second.
Yes. I want to come home though.
That's
not one way.
With our, no warp drive or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
Our current science.
Right.
If you could go to Mars, would you go?
I would go. I would go. Yeah. There are a lot of people who would, and I don't blame them. I would go. I would probably cry and or pass out the whole way up and and the whole way down. But it's fine. I'll deal. No, I would love to go. I definitely want to come home, but yeah, the question is just, would I go? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It just would be too exciting. People say like, oh, you're going to be bored 6 months waiting to get there and 6 months coming back. I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to Mars, man. Like, I'm going to be in the I can touch all those rocks I want to touch every day when I look at the monitor. I would do it. For better or for worse.
I don't know if I would want to go. It seems
Yeah.
I know.
Well,
I
and
don't know if I'm
Justin
that much
in
of
the
an
chat
explorer.
room in YouTube is asking, and who would you need to convince to let you go? That's really, that is
well,
a good point.
first, NASA. If I can get past NASA,
Right.
then the higher order, my family, of course.
Yeah.
Oddly, I know this is weird, but because she's a scientist also, not a Mars scientist, but environmental science. So when we go out, like I'm talking about the rocks, she's talking about the plants. It's a perfect match. But she's like, oh yeah, I'd let you go. I mean, I know you'd want to go. So we have an agreement. I have the Mars pass. I don't know. To go to Mars,
definitely. Yeah.
I was given the opportunity.
Go to Mars free.
It's very important to have that discussion at some point. Never gonna happen. But nevertheless, I think we'd be okay. But I mean, I have 2 boys, so that would be a little tough. But depending on the day, they might be like, "Yeah, go to Mars, Dad. Come on."
Depending on the day, you might be like, "Yeah, see you later."
Yeah, that's right.
Especially with all this homeschooling situation happening, I'm out.
Yeah, that's right. I'm done. You want some social distancing? Going to Mars. Never come back. No. Absolutely.
No. This has been just wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us and talking to us about Mars and mapping and all of the stuff that you've been working on and will be working on. Your excitement is palpable.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. It was a great time.
And thanks for, bringing the dinosaur.
Always.
We all need a little bit of levity. Where can people find you online if they would like to follow you and your mapping adventures?
Sure. I am on Twitter at Circular, CIRQUELAR. It is my personal account. It's not an NASA account. So beware, it's half Mars and mapping and half probably shouting. But but you feel free to follow me, and I certainly bring the science when I can.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks.
We are going to move along with the rest of our show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yep. Take care.
You too. Thank you. Everyone, this was Dr. Fred Califf, and we are going to move on with our show. We've got some science in the second half. Stay tuned for a little bit more This Week in Science. Thank you for listening to TWIS. You are the reason that we are able to do what we do every single week, bringing you up-to-date and down-to-earth views on science, and sometimes out to Mars views on science discoveries. And with your help, we can do even more together. That's right. We can bring a sane perspective to a world full of misinformation. Head to twis.org right now, click on the Patreon link, and choose your level of support. Be a part of bringing sanity and science to more people. Also, I would like to, I think that's what I needed to do. That's what I needed to say. You can share TWIS with people. That's what we want to do. We can't do this without you, really. We need you. We need you.
And we're back. You're listening to This Week in Science.
Yes, you are. We're back. And Dr. Califf, you're still here. Do you want to talk science with us, or are you just going to listen?
I was just going to listen.
Okay.
But, whatever.
Okay. If something is interesting to you, feel free to pipe in. We're going to keep moving.
Oh, okay.
Is this thing on? That's right. Always assume a hot mic. All right, jumping back into the science, we are going to talk, about COVID-19, because that is at the top of everyone's minds right now. And there is some very interesting science around this disease, this virus that we are dealing with at the moment. So first, last week we had a conversation, And Blair, you asked about how safe your mail was to handle. And just about that same day, I think it was that same day, a preprint came out that has now been published in the New England Journal of Medicine on aerosol and surface stability of SARS-CoV-2 as compared with SARS-CoV-1. Now, SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that causes COVID-19, the disease we're dealing with right now. SARS-CoV-1 was the virus behind the SARS epidemic. Now, in their findings, they discovered that SARS-CoV-2, the COVID-19 virus, is viable in aerosols for up to 3 hours. But that was the duration of their experiment, so they don't know if it's longer. So 3 hours. There is a reduction in the infectious particles in during that time. So that it does reduce, but it's still viable in the air for 3 hours. Now, surfaces. Where is it viable? A lot more viable on plastic and stainless steel. So they looked at plastic, stainless steel, copper, and cardboard. Plastic and stainless steel, they found that it was viable for up to 72 hours on plastic, 48 hours on stainless steel. This is why we want to wipe down surfaces. Copper, it was only viable for 4 hours. So copper has antiviral properties that break it down and keep it from being viable for very long. Cardboard, which you could associate also with, Amazon packages or your mail. Paper. It was viable for 24 hours. So they measured a viable SARS-CoV-2 for 24 hours after. So if you really want to feel safe when you're getting your mail, maybe, let it sit for a day. Or spray it with Lysol. I don't know.
I guess it depends what you're trying to protect yourself from, right? Because if you're worried about, people were saying they were worried about packages from China, right? Which at this point, first of all, it's everywhere. So that's all silly. But it takes more than 24 hours for stuff to get here from China. So that's not so much a concern. Even most mail, I would say it takes
more than 24
usually
hours.
more than 24 hours to get to you. So really the only person then you have to worry about is your mail carrier, which, I've been seeing people being very careful. So hopefully that's not too much of a concern. But yes, if you're very worried about it, leave it overnight.
Just let it sit overnight. There you go.
But this is different from what I heard a couple weeks ago.
Yes. But now we actually have a study that has looked at this, and now we have some information to inform our actions, that's why I like science. It tells us things.
So now I'm going to demand all of my mail be delivered in copper envelopes.
That's right.
It's going to be more expensive to ship, but...
Put it in the copper container, please.
You really want to send me that spam? Go ahead and put it in a copper envelope.
All those mailers. It's going to get really expensive really fast.
Yeah.
And then let me I'm going to jump into this story now about our new reality that we're kind of looking at. We are staring down the barrel of a very serious, potentially societally changing epidemic that an analysis came out of a team from the Imperial College London on on COVID-19 and how it will potentially spread if we enforce certain ways of dealing with it, whether we use what they called mitigation strategies, which is just very light social distancing, telling people who are 70 and older and have health issues that make them more likely to get the disease, telling them to socially isolate, and then specifically picking people who have the disease or who have tested for it and getting them to isolate or be quarantined. Mitigation is less impactful on society as a whole. Their other option was suppression, which is basically what China has undergone in taking its society and putting it, and Italy as well, putting their society under lockdown and massive social distancing practices to keep people apart, reducing the sizes of gatherings. This model the end of the story is that the thing that worked in their computer modeling of the disease was suppression. Even with mitigation that would work partially, we would still overshoot our healthcare infrastructure's capacity, especially in the ICU and for ventilator machines, and we would end up, even with mitigation, having at least 1 million deaths in the United States. And so then the suppression, everything's great. You suppress and then the disease goes away. It doesn't spread. It seems really nice. But the problem is, if you ever stop suppressing, the population still is not immune to it. So the disease comes back again. And so they say that we have to suppress. This model suggests we have to do suppression tactics for 18 months, which is the first estimate of when a vaccine will be available.
That is so long.
Yes, that is so long. But I follow some amazing people on Twitter and was reading the feed of an individual named Trevor Bedford, who is a researcher up in Washington. And he has been on the front lines of looking at the genetics of this virus since the beginning, since the outbreak in Seattle. And he has some thoughts about this paper that's out of the Imperial College, the modeling that they've done. They only look at a few possibilities: mitigation or suppression, and a little bit of variation within those two possibilities. But what he says is that if we really buckle down in terms of technology, we may have a chance at not having to suppress as heavily. That if we do something that is more like South Korea's response in just testing everybody and tracking down the cases, making sure that everybody who has it or is connected to somebody who's had it self-isolates or self-quarantines, then we can stop and lead to suppression in a quicker and easier way. But testing, he says, is the main strategy. And so he just says we just need to put all of one of his tweets here says, the first strategy revolves around a massive rollout of testing capacity. We believe that a significant proportion of epidemic transmission is due to mild and maybe asymptomatic infections, and that a lot of transmission may occur in the window before symptoms develop. These routes can be reduced by a huge rollout of testing capacity. If someone can be tested early in their illness before they show symptoms, they could effectively self-isolate and reduce onward transmission compared to isolation when symptoms develop. Then he goes on to say the second strategy that he has been reading about is related to cell phone location data, which people may have issues with related to privacy. But according to some researchers who have been considering this option, through cell phone location data, we would be able to combine that data with data on known positive cases to alert possible exposures to self-isolate and get tested. So there's also another strategy of getting serological assays run on people to identify individuals who have recovered and are likely to possess immunity. And those people could return to the workforce and keep society functioning. So if we tested those people, which we haven't started doing yet. His last tweet, though, I think is the most important. Together, I believe these and other case-based strategies can bring down the epidemic. This is the Apollo program of our times. Let's get to it.
Yeah, I mean, the important thing about that is that what all the scientists working in all the different ways to try to tackle this problem need is one thing, and that's time.
Yep.
And that is why I'm working from home right now. That is why everyone is working from home right now, because we are trying to give them time. And it's hard, but I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. And I always think it's, maybe I'm healthy. Maybe I got a mild case, but maybe my next door neighbor can't have that. And the next person and the next person, you just don't know. You don't know who can ride it out and who can't. And what, and I think for me personally, I'm like, I'll bite the bullet. Let's do it. I mean, the I read that study or parts of the results of that study, and I'm like, okay, that's the hill we have to climb.
Yeah.
Start climbing. It's not going to get better. You can sit at the bottom of the hill as long as you want, but if you don't start climbing it, you'll never get to the top. So
just like curiosity.
Just like curiosity. That's right. It all comes around.
And I also to say, I'm at the end of my second day of working from home, and I can't believe how hard I'm finding it already because I am such an extrovert. I'm used to like popping over to my coworker's desk and bouncing an idea off of that. And it's been such a change for me, an intense change. But I also have been spending all day on Zoom meetings and social media and email and listening to podcasts. And there's all of this amazing technology that we have to stay connected. I cannot imagine what this would be like without the amazing connectivity that we have. And so I'm trying really hard to focus on that and recognize that, Netflix added functionality for us to be able to watch movies together and pause and chat while we're watching movies. And I think I have hope because I do feel like our society is rising to the occasion. I see social media being used for the right thing, to applaud people for staying home, to support each other, to deliver groceries to people who are over 65. We gotta make it work. And the way to do it is to stay hopeful and reach out to people who are having a hard time. Hello. So,
I apologize for not reaching out more because I've been training for this isolation my entire life. I work in my basement.
Yeah.
I've been training for this.
I'm happy to go in the browser and look at rocks of Mars. I can't touch them anyways.
Exactly.
It's no difference to me. I'm on Mars every day.
That tactile item already.
Yeah.
One more story on the COVID front that is actually exciting news. There is an NIH trial along with a company called Moderna, who they are trying the first human clinical trial of a COVID-19 vaccine at the Kaiser Permanente Washington Health Research Institute in Seattle. The first dose was given this last weekend. They are going to be testing not the efficacy, but just the safety and the response of the body to this new vaccine in 45 young, healthy volunteers who will receive different doses of the vaccine. Now, this vaccine, the reason they've got something so quickly, and other groups are working on similar things, is that it's an interesting type of vaccine called an mRNA vaccine. mRNA is messenger RNA, and in our cells, messenger RNA is little bits of RNA that goes from the DNA out to the ribosomes to get translated into proteins. And the idea behind the mRNA vaccine is that we can plug a little bit of viral mRNA that is the antigen that we want our cells to recognize and to get a immune response against. And then our own cells take that mRNA and start treating it almost like a virus itself, taking that mRNA and making copies of it, turning out more copies, making little viral proteins that then the body recognizes and says that's not okay and mounts an immune response. So it's a really interesting idea that it just uses the machinery that viruses use to copy themselves already. The interesting, or I guess the questionable part about this is that this particular type of mRNA vaccine is as yet unproven. They have not done a lot of animal trials. I mean, really, when were they going to have done that? So, I mean, this is a brand new disease to humanity. So they haven't been working on this for a couple of years. They've been working on it for a month or two. Mm-hmm. And so these human tests that are going on concurrently with other animal efficacy trials. So they've already shown that the mice respond, and the mRNA vaccine doesn't make them sick. And because it doesn't make them sick, they're going to test that aspect of it in people. Now, the next question is, what kind of immune response is it going to elicit in people? We have absolutely no idea. And that after this first part of the clinical trial happens, then we'll have to do the actual efficacy trials and then get into manufacturer. And so if this vaccine works, that's 18 months from now.
Yeah.
But we started the first clinical trial, which is something exciting.
Yeah.
That's great.
Clock's ticking at least, right?
Yeah.
Clock's ticking. There are a bunch of groups working on different kinds of vaccines. The mRNA idea is an exciting one. There are other mRNA vaccines for different diseases. Once you have an RNA or a genomic sequence, you can target very specific segments of RNA to be able to create a vaccine. And it's something that can be done very quickly. It's like basically as soon as you have the genome, you can move forward on it, which in the world of diseases and vaccines, the faster you can get something to market, the better. Very exciting. Yeah. Blair, I've been talking too much about COVID and all this stuff. Do you want to tell me something about animals? Should we move into the animals?
Yeah, let's talk about some animals, shall we?
Let's have some fun animals. We got some possible hope on the vaccine front there for COVID, but let's have some happy animal time.
Yes.
Ugh, it's time for Blair's Animal Corner.
She loves our creatures, great and small. Biped, millipede, no pet at all. You want to hear about animals? She's your girl. Except for giant pandas and squirrels. There's Animal Corner.
I was waiting for Justin to say, "What you got, Blair?" I was like, "Oh no! Oh, I see Justin."
Oh, and then he disappeared.
And then
he was here.
Anyway,
Split second.
well, perhaps quite apropos, I have a story from Tokyo Metropolitan University about how Drosophila fruit flies have given us the clues to potentially edit or remove traumatizing long-term memories.
What?
Oh, what?
So after a particularly rough self-isolation, you might be able to delete this from your memory banks.
What isolation? I don't remember it anymore.
Well, anyway, and believe it or not, the big key to this mystery, lights. Let me explain.
Yeah, please do. What? As I'm here bathed in them.
So, as we know, particularly shocking events, traumatizing events can be consolidated into long-term memory. And through that process, new proteins are synthesized and neuronal circuits in the brain are modified. And so that's like stored. And so active maintenance is required to keep those changes in your long-term memory banks. And that protects them from the constant cellular rearrangement and renewal happening in the brain. The way that's happening, we're not entirely sure. We don't know exactly what the mechanism is behind that. But knowing kind of the background of the basics of what's happening there with long-term memory, and also knowing that light impacts circadian rhythms, mood, cognition, these researchers in Tokyo decided, what about memory and light? And so for the fruit flies, for them to be able to test this on them, they had to expose them to trauma. Now, the trauma that these fruit flies experienced was something called the courtship conditioning paradigm, which is where male flies are exposed to female flies that have already mated, which means they are not having it. And the mated females are so unreceptive that the males show stress and no longer attempt to court females. So that is apparently a very traumatic experience for them. So then they took these traumatized fruit flies, They took some and they kept them in the dark for 2 days. And afterwards, they showed no reluctance to mate. But those that they left on the normal day-night cycle were still traumatized. Which means the environmental light somehow modified their retention of long-term memory. They also made sure to adjust their experiment to make sure this was not due to lack of sleep. So flies on a diurnal cycle were slightly sleep deprived to match the flies' sleeping habits in the dark, so that it was the same. So they were able to kind of make sure that that's exactly what was going on. Then they were able to actually look molecularly what's happening. So they looked at the pigment dispersing factor, PDF, which is known to be expressed in response to light. And they did find that PDF regulated the transcription of a protein called CAMP, C-A-M-P, and
cyclic AMP.
Yes.
Okay.
And they know that that part of the brain in insects is implicated in memory and learning. So they think that this is the molecular mechanism through which light affects long-term memory.
So would it be that, I mean, will this have implications basically to do with circadian rhythms, or is it something more basic than that? Like, I don't feel happy, I'm going to turn off the lights now.
So it shouldn't impact emotion directly because it doesn't appear to be hormone related. It doesn't appear to be, receptor related. So it doesn't appear to have to do with actual mood. And from what they can tell, it really looks like it is impacting their ability to remember the traumatic event. But that being said, these are flies. They do not live as long as humans. They do not have as complex memories as humans. And their impulse in relation to that memory might not be as complex as things that we might be trying to impact in the human brain. So this is not to say, go sit in the dark for a few days and you'll forget something bad that happened to you. But this is to say,
I can tell you that doesn't work.
Right. It's
my high school years.
Probably, it's going to make you feel worse, probably. But it might mean that we have an idea of how to impact long-term memory storage in the brain with light. It's possible that could be isolated and controlled for therapeutic use in humans 1 million years from now. It's very far away, but it is a very clear connection between exposure to light and memory.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I wonder at some point if there will be some aspect. I mean, I know that we're using light to control neurons these days with optogenetics, blue light. So I wonder if there's some other aspects of neuronal control or, for maybe not at the complex level of human behavior,
right,
changing memories, but in terms of research tactics to be able to study certain aspects of memory, maybe it'll have some influence. I don't know. This is very interesting.
Well, and then you start to wonder, should I be studying outside in natural light? Will that help me remember things? So
interesting idea. Yeah.
Should I have my computer monitor and my screen pointed at me while I'm scrolling, reading about COVID on Twitter at 10 o'clock at night when it should be dark?
Which is a whole nother point, which is a big part of your brain's memory system is knowing what to throw out and what to keep. And if we're bombarding ourselves with light that we shouldn't be, are we keeping things we're not supposed to be? This could move back and forth in all sorts of crazy ways. So just knowing that light and memory is connected is an important first step. We're diurnal animals. We're animals impacted by circadian rhythms. It all makes sense to me. But
it all makes sense. Blair's tying it all together. I still need some help, but yes.
All I heard as a geologist was they made incel flies and then they fixed them, which I thought was pretty cool.
I was thinking about that too.
Sorry, there's a little too much truth there.
No, it's
I'm a geologist. You know, I don't know anything about DNA and mRNA and circadian rhythms. I can say the words, but that's where it ends. Kind of.
Well, if you don't know about that, I'm guessing you might not know too much about temperature-dependent sex determination, which is one of my favorite things to talk about.
No, I do not.
Yeah, so that when we have babies, they are born male or female based on whatever chromosome they get from their father, because the female is XX, right? So they always get an X chromosome, but then they either get an X or a Y from their father, and that makes them a girl or boy, XXXY, right? But different animals have different ways of determining sex at birth.
Wow.
And turtles, for example, the hotter it is, the more females hatch in their nest. Temperature-dependent sex determination, which is why, for example, since climate change, some sea turtle populations, especially on the equator, are becoming over 80% female, which is causing some problems. But this is a study not about sea turtles, but about another type of animal that has temperature-dependent sex determination. That's right, it's crocodilians. The animals that have been on this planet for a very, 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 very long time. They have outlasted two giant extinctions. The mass extinction in the Cretaceous period, when they killed all the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, and another one in the Eocene 33.9 million years ago that wiped out a lot of marine and other aquatic life. So these guys have figured out pretty well how to survive. That being said, they also have temperature-dependent sex determination, and the warmer the eggs, the more likely the eggs will be male. So they have the opposite differentiation of turtles. But their ability to survive in the past and their likely ability to survive this giant event of anthropogenic climate change is most likely due to their hands-on parenting approach. This is a study from University of Bath's Milner Center for Evolution, and it all comes down to how they care for those eggs. So remember the turtles that I talked about before? They lay their eggs in usually a sandy nest, and then they just kind of leave them, and the eggs are off on their own. But with crocodilians, they actually will arrange a nest made out of deadfall and other things, rotten vegetation, and they will kind of make the perfect nest. And they're very good at curating that nest to be the right temperature. And they actually are not beholden to any geographical location either. Turtles usually go to the beach where they were laid, where they were born, and so they're kind of tied to that location. But crocodilians can lay their eggs wherever, and their geographical location does not impact their incubation temperatures, which most likely is because they're so particular about creating that nest in a particular way. So their temperature fluctuations for their eggs are actually way less than what the turtles experience. So they're being so deliberate about their nest making means that their populations aren't being impacted by climate change and their temperature dependent sex determination in the same way. Right. They actually looked across 20 different species of crocodilians across the world. They looked at the relationship between their latitude, their body size, their reproductive data like egg mass, clutch size, and incubation temperature. And they really found that these temperatures were pretty consistent. So they're really good at what they do as parents.
That's cool. I mean, it explains how they've survived so long, especially, through mass extinctions that did have major climactic temperature changes. I mean, they have a strategy that allows them to abide like
Absolutely.
The dude. Right?
Yeah. And when I talk to kids at work about sea turtles, they always get really upset about plastic pollution, because that's always what you hear about, right? With sea turtles is the plastic bags and the straws and stuff like that. But I try to explain the reason that plastic pollution is such a problem for sea turtles is that, I'm always reminded of that episode of The Simpsons when Mr. Burns goes into the doctor and they try to show how he had all of the diseases and they were all trying to get through the door at the same time. And so it's like that. You have all these different environmental stressors. You have poaching of turtles. You have climate change impacting their birth rates of the different sexes. And then you also have plastic pollution. And this kind of triple whammy is really devastating their population. So if you take out even one of those, their population has an opportunity to bounce back. And that's really why all these things individually and together are having this impact. So the idea here is that by not having to worry about climate change impacting the birth rate of the different sexes of crocodilians, that is one less thing to worry about where they can potentially get through this crazy thing we're going through now. And that's really what they wanted to look at, is that the current rate of extinction has us leading up to a mass extinction event larger than what killed the dinosaurs. So anticipating that, researchers want to know what is going to make it.
Yeah. What's going to make it and why? What are their strategies? Yeah.
And so their hope is that crocodilians will once again survive through another mass extinction because of their amazing parenting skills. That being said, there is still human-induced threats on crocodilians, pollution, habitat loss, flooding, poaching. All these sorts of things are still important and still impactful. I don't want to reduce that in the conversation, except to say that this is one huge impact on population dynamics that they don't have to worry about.
It's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also thinking that they don't like to eat jellyfish. So the crocodiles also aren't going after plastic bags out in the water. But
And I will also say,
you're right. It is one less thing. That's cool.
Yeah. Crocodilians, a lot of people don't realize, are, aside from being really cool, and that's why we want to keep them around, they're actually keystone species. They're really important in their environments for a bunch of reasons. They're population control. But most of them also are slogging around in the muck. And when they do that, they dig with those big muscular tails, channels that water can flow through so aquatic animals can live in those spaces when water levels are low. So they have they're basically architects in their environments on top of everything else. Pretty important.
That's really cool. A total random thought. I was thinking about dinosaur egg clutches and how the way they put their eggs, if that had anything to do with sex determination on their species as they developed sorry, just totally.
It's very possible. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We don't know the answer to that. We also know though, that there are other things like ostriches. They will actually arrange their eggs very particularly so that the dominant female's egg is in the middle. So it is least likely to get eaten or broken.
Interesting. Wow.
So there's other dynamics happening with how a nest is organized as well.
Wow.
Yes.
Very cool.
Bird nests versus dinosaur nests. And now I'm going to take us out of the animal corner of crocodilians and climate change and into the world of limb transplants. Because
yes.
And
this sounds important. Please continue.
Yeah, this is important and it's super interesting. Researchers publishing in Science Advances this last week, they used a method that is employed by tumor cells to trick the body of a transplant donor, the body of a transplant recipient mouse, into accepting the limb from a donor. So it's just fascinating the way that they've done it. So they determined that there is a molecule that tumor cells use that is called CCL22. And CCL22 is released by tumor cells, and it tricks regulatory T cells into basically recognizing the tumor cells as self and that they shouldn't be attacked. Basically saying, look, I'm like you. It's a nice, I don't know. It's like, it's a fake mask to trick the body.
Nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here. Exactly. They're using the force, and it's called CCL22.
These aren't the cells that you're looking for, or they are the cells you're looking for.
That's it. Yes. So they synthetically created CCL22. They transplanted the limbs of brown rats onto the bodies of white rats. And then they gave all of the rats, anti-rejection drugs for the first 20 days, and then gave them an injection of the CCL22 in one of 3 doses, a low dose, a medium dose, or a high dose. Then they stopped the immunosuppressive drugs and waited to see what happens. They gave another dose of the CCL22 at about 41 days, and they found that the limbs that were in the group that got the medium dose of this not a drug, but the protein that was injected, the medium dose led to the donors. The limb lasted for over 200 days with absolutely no rejection after immunosuppressive drugs were stopped. Versus the low dose of the protein, the limbs fell off after and were rejected very shortly after the immunosuppressive drugs stopped. And also, interestingly, in the high dose group, the limb was rejected at about 60 days. So there was a sweet spot there in the amount of protein that the T cells liked, that the T cells recognized. And then they wanted to really find out, okay, these limbs have been on this recipient for a while. What is the body recognizing? And so then they did skin grafts from other naive mice that had not been involved in this at all, and skin grafts from the bodies of the brown mouse donors. And the body rejected the skin grafts from the mice that they hadn't recognized as self, and they accepted the skin grafts from the owner of the limb that they had received.
Wow.
Yeah, so the immune cells in the body started recognizing the cells in the limb as self, and they lasted for a very significant period of time. So they're calling them recruitment microparticles is the therapy that they are using that seems to be very interesting. We don't know exactly how far this will go, whether someone brought up the fact, another researcher brought up the fact that in tissue from living donors, the body responds to it differently than it does tissue from deceased donors. So they don't know if there's going to be a difference in how the CCL22 works if they're looking at living versus deceased donation materials. But at the same time, this is a very promising avenue, because if you can reduce the amount of immunosuppression that goes on in transplant recipients, you're going to potentially improve their quality of life significantly. But anyway, it's very exciting. This is just the first study, and who knows, maybe down the way, the immunosuppressive drugs will just be in there for a little while, and then you'll just have to get a regular shot of your CCL22 so that your body continues recognizing your transplanted face as your own.
Could be important.
Maybe.
Could be important.
You know, the important things in life.
I hate when my face sloughs off in the morning. They glue it back on.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're Nick Cage, you got to do what you got to do.
That's right.
That's right. Face off. getting in there. Let's do a couple of quick stories. But first, I just want to let everyone know if you're interested in a TWIS shirt or mug or other item of TWIS merchandise, you can head to twis.org and click on the Zazzle link. That is where you can browse all sorts of wonderful goodies, items that are in our store. Quick science news. Can humans detect magnetic fields?
Pigeons
The answer is kind of yes, but we don't know it. So there's a new study out in a journal called eNeuro, which is available to the public, so you can read the whole study. Researchers set up a very elaborate system in which to test their question of whether or not the brain itself, whether neurological signals within the brain respond to magnetic fields. They put people on a non-magnetic chair on an isolated floor in a room with acoustic panels, Merritt coils that was wrapped in a Faraday cage with an EEG machine to measure their brain activity. And they found that when they turned on magnetic fields in certain directions that corresponded to nodding the head or turning it from side to side, that the brain, the activation of the brain changed accordingly. And it had very specific activation changes in response to the changes of the magnetic fields. However, the people who were sitting there in the box, wrapped in a Faraday cage, they had no clue. Everybody who came out said, "What magnetic field? I didn't notice anything." Nobody noticed anything, but their brains did. So what's going on and why? Is it simply that the magnetic fields are affecting the electric currents, electrochemical currents in the brain? Is it simply some kind of capacitive effect? Or is it that there are little magnetite particles in our brains that are responding as some kind of evolutionary holdover from the past?
Well, what makes magnetic fields? Like everything, right? Like that's how sharks figure out where animals are under the sand and stuff like that, right? Is electromagnetic fields and stuff, right? Is that a thing?
Yeah, well, the Earth has electromagnetic fields because of the dynamo in its center. So there's that big magnetic field. But then living
just a heartbeat makes one, right? So so that's what I'm wondering is if you know
right hand rule around electrical wires, right?
You can kind of tell when someone's like looking at you behind your back. That's the kind of thing I'm wondering about, is if this is an evolutionary thing to know where other living things are in relation to you. It's like a sixth sense. I know that's like a very far jump, but I'm feeling like since life is an electromagnetic field, that it could be a subconscious thing that our bodies and our brains are just aware of because of that.
I guess I know they talk about pigeons tracking in the magnetic field, but the question is like, what's that sense organ that they have that we don't, or sharks have, which is the other one, and like, or is it one of those like vestigial things, like maybe we used to be able to detect a magnetic field to some sense, but it is long since disappeared because we don't. It's not our primary. We have eyes that are binocular vision and hearing, which override any of that past sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's interesting.
But yeah, it's very interesting. Apparently we can perceive them. So what does this mean? And what else do we need to learn, right? What's going on there? And, as we are in my last story for the night, as we are in this very anxiety-inducing period of time in society, I think this particular study is particularly apropos. Parent-based treatment as efficacious as cognitive behavioral therapy for childhood anxiety. Basically, this study found that if your kid is anxious, it's just as good for the parents to go to therapy to treat it as it is for the kids because they find that very often, hey, it's the parents who are perpetuating cycles that induce anxiety in their children.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and as an educator, I can also speak to, modeling proper technique around parents to try to, encourage them to change, or try something new with the way that they respond to certain things that their child does. So I can see how this is similar, how if you're modeling how to respond to anxiety as a therapist to an adult, that then they can kind of use that to model to the child.
Yeah.
So if your child's anxious and then you get anxious from your child, then you're just building on that like a wave on a wave, right? So if you can model the calm, I would say they can pick up that calm or try to, pull it together.
Pull it together. Blair, what are your last quick stories here?
Oh, just Legos live a long time.
Yeah, especially in my house.
Yes, well,
on the floor where I step on them.
Yeah.
University of Plymouth asked the question we've all wanted to ask. How long does a Lego brick last in the ocean?
Oh,
they did
forever.
this. I have some issues with the methodology, but ultimately they measured the mass of individual bricks that they found on beaches, and they used them in X-ray fluorescence spectrometer to figure out the age of the individual pieces based on the elements that were used at particular decades in the creation of Legos. And then they used items that were still in package. If you have those Legos from the 70s and 80s still in their packages, it could be used for science, to weigh them against these ones that they found on the beaches. And they found that they think that Legos can last anywhere between 100 and 1,300 years in the ocean. And that seems low to me.
That's great.
It's hard plastic. Because
then they're
problem.
just Legos, and then they're not being microplastic. They're just being Legos in the ocean.
Right.
Yeah.
So my problem with that mainly being, I could talk about this forever, but quick news. My main problem being that this is only a 50-year-old Lego that they're testing, and degradation is not always linear. Sometimes it's asymptotic. Sometimes, so how can you model this mathematically to know how long something's going to last when you're looking at the course of 1,300 years based on a 50-year degradation? Anyway, Legos last a long time. I will also throw out there that Legos are looking at making hemp or other plant-based plastics to be released by 2030. So they are looking into this. It's a pretty
instead
cool
of
company.
oil-based.
Yeah, so that it could degrade if it ended up in nature.
Plastic is plastic when it's plastic.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Wow.
as we know, there's corn-based plastic, there's potato-based plastic, and these things we know are better. So it's the more we
actually no. So like there are the potato starches that make plastic-like products that are meant to biodegrade, and then there is plastic that is made from soy, from corn, from oil, from hemp. It all gets turned into these polymers that become plastic. It's just, I think the big issue, it's not what it turns into when it degrades, because once it's plastic, it is the molecule that is used for that plastic based on the long chain polymer that's in play. It's where it comes from. Is it coming from oil? Is it coming from soy? Is it coming from hemp? Where is it coming from? I think that is the bigger issue.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a few steps along the supply chain that are concerns about how it's being made and if there's byproducts. But isn't there also a difference in potential inhibiting in when it gets into animals, things like that, hormone pathways and things like that it can be different. I don't know. Depending on.
As far as I'm aware, it's the molecule. What is the molecule that you're dealing with? Plastic is a very broad category. What is the specific molecule that Lego needs to use to make its Legos so that they're durable and can last for 1,300 years in the ocean.
Well, isn't that the other side that it's also like how long it lasts? I mean, if it was any plastic, but it only lasted, let's say, hits water and it lasts a day,
right,
and totally dissolves. I mean, that would be great in some ways. I mean, unless it's releasing some other byproduct.
Right.
But I would think that how long it can last before it deteriorates is also that other thing. Because if all the plastics hit the ocean water and dissolved, no problem per se, unless it was releasing some other byproduct that was in the plastic itself.
Well, and what does dissolve mean? Is it
Plastics, breaks down into other chemicals, which then can be picked up in other ways. But in terms of that, like microplastic issue and little bits that can then get into lungs and be internalized as opposed to being flushed out, or
Well, anyway, Legos last a long time. And then my last story is less of late breaking news and more just I want to leave everyone with some good news while we're hearing all the bad news all day, every day while we're stuck in our homes. This is actually from goodnewsnetwork.org, and they compiled 10 stories of good news relating to COVID-19. The first we already talked about, which is the vaccine that was delivered to volunteers in Seattle that's underway. 2, distilleries across the United States are making their own free hand sanitizers to give away for free. Yes. 3, air pollution plummets in cities with high rates of quarantine. And I saw today dolphins are in Venice right now, which is crazy. In the canals.
People aren't in boats in the canals, so the dolphins are.
Yeah. 4, Johns Hopkins researcher says antibodies from recovered COVID patients could help protect people at risk. We talked about before. 5, South Korean outbreak is abating as recoveries outnumber new infections. I think the 4th day in a row. 6, China celebrates several milestones of recovery after temporary hospitals close and parks reopen.
Wow.
7, Australian researchers are testing 2 drugs as potential cures. 8, this is just more social fun stuff. Uber Eats is supporting the restaurant industry by waiving delivery fees for 100,000 restaurants. It's livelihood to a lot of people out there. They're helping out with that. Yeah. 9, Dutch and Canadian researchers are reporting additional breakthrough research on treating the virus. And 10, you can Google ways that you can help people and businesses during the outbreak. So while you're stuck at home, if you're not working 12-hour days from home, if you have some free time, there's lots of things you can do from home to help.
Cool.
There you go. A little bit of good news before you guys all go and open up your browsers and see all the bad news again.
No, I'm going to do the Google good search.
Yeah.
I'm going to Google for good.
At least one a day, right? One good search a day.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I can add that I'm opening up a new line of dinosaur-style personal protection equipment.
There we go.
Yeah.
So that you can be entertained while you're in the hospital.
Perfect.
I do appreciate that. Yes. Oh, we've come to the end of another show. I hope all of you are staying well and finding the positive linings in all of this. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, share it with a friend. Time for some shout outs. Fada, thank you for your help on the social media, on show notes, for the great challah bread that you gave me this week. That was amazing. Gord, thank you for manning the chat room. And Identity 4, thank you for recording the show. This help cannot be done without you. I'd also like to thank the Burroughs Welcome Fund and our Patreon sponsors for their generous support. Thank you to Paul Disney, Ed Dyer, Stu Pollock, Andrew Swanson, Craig Landon, Ed, Philip Shane, Ken Hayes, Charlene Henry, Joshua Fury, Steve DeBell, Alex Wilson, Tony Steele, Richard Porter, Mark Mazzaros, Bob Calder, Jack Matthew Litwin, Jason Roberts, Bill K. Eric Knapp, Richard Brian Condren, Dave Neighbor, Mark Hessenflow, Ashley Doyle, Maddie Perrin, Ben Bignell, Justin Taylor PS, Josiah Zahner, Howard Tan, Donald Mundus, Zara Forfar, Dan K, Matt Bass, Darwin Hannon, Patrick Perrick, Beccararo, Jean Tellier, John Gridley, Corinne Benton, Adam LaJoy, Sarah Chavis, Rodney Lewis, Tiffany Boyd, Mountain Sloth, Seth Gradney, Stephen Alberon, John Ratnaswamy, Dave Friedel, Daryl Myshak, Paul Ronovich, Sue Doster, Dave Wilkinson, Noodles, Kevin Reardon, Christoph Zucknarek, Ulysses Adkins, Artyom, Rick Ramus, Paul, John McKee, Jason Olds, Brian Carrington, Christopher Dryo, Lisa Suzuki, Jim Derpo, Greg Riley, Sean Lamb, Steve Leisman, Kurt Larson, Rudy Garcia, Marjorie Gary S., Robert Greg Briggs, Brendan Minish, Christopher Rappin, Flying Out, Aaron Luthen, Matt Sutter, Kevin Parachan, Byron Lee, and E.O. Thank you all for your generous support. We really could not do this without you, and we understand times are getting difficult at the moment, and we appreciate your support even more. If you would like to support us on Patreon, that's right. If you would like to, if you need information, visit patreon.com/thisweekinscience. On next week's show, we will be back on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific time, broadcasting live from our YouTube and Facebook channels and from twis.org/live.
Hey, want to listen to us as a podcast? Lots of time for podcasts these days. Just search for This Week in Science wherever podcasts are found. If you enjoyed the show, get your friends to subscribe as well.
For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes and links to stories will be available on our website, twis.org. And you can also sign up for our newsletter.
You can also contact us directly. You can email Kirsten at thisweekinscience.com, Justin at twisminion@gmail.com, or Blair, me, at blairbaz@twis.org. Just put TWIS, TWIS, somewhere in that subject line, or your email will surely be spam filtered into oblivion.
You can also ping us on Twitter, where we are at TWIS Science, at Dr. Kiki, at Jacksonfly, and at Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you would like us to address or a suggestion for an interview, please let us know.
We'll be back here next week, and we hope you'll join us again for more great science news.
Oh,
and if you've learned anything from the show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth, and I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 I've got one disclaimer, and it shouldn't be news, that what I say may not represent your views, but I've done the calculations and I've got a plan. If you listen to the science, you may just yet understand that we're not trying to threaten your philosophy. We're just trying to save the world from jeopardy. 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 And This Week in Science is coming your way. So everybody listen to everything we say, and if you use our method instead of rolling a die, we may rid the world of toxoplasma gondii. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 Got a laundry list of items I want to address, from stopping global hunger to dredging Loch Ness. I'm trying to promote more rational thought, and I'll try to answer any question you've got. But how can I ever see the changes I seek when I can only set up shop 1 hour a week? This Week in Science is coming your way. You better just listen to what we say, and if you've learned anything from the words that we've said, then please just remember it's all in your head. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in 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 Science.